Hey everybody, welcome to the I303 podcast where we share ingenious insights and oddball opinions from the perspective of an IO. Today I have Alia Newhall with me, and we're going to be talking about succession planning and how potentially that can benefit our options in selecting a president. So without further ado, Alia, please feel free to share a little bit more about yourself.
Hey David, thanks for having me. My name's Alia Newhall. I'm an IO psychologist with certificates in succession management and human resources. I have over a decade in federal HR, and I've participated in a number of presidential transitions from Obama to Trump and Trump to Biden, back to Trump. I'm not really a party loyalist. I'm someone who will usually vote for the best person, that presents themselves at the time, regardless of what party they claim. And I'm currently the chief operating officer of a leadership development and coaching firm, woman-owned small business called CC Pathways Incorporated. So I'm excited to be here. I'm really interested in succession management. It's really something I'm interested in, and I think organizations deeply should be as well. It's really a difference maker in an organization in my mind. So happy to be here to talk about the topic.
Yeah, definitely. And what better position to talk about succession than probably one of the most critical positions in all of the United States, and that is the president. So let's start off with first kind of laying the table. So succession, for individuals who may not be familiar with what that term means, would you mind sharing a little bit more in terms of what is succession and how do I apply it in the business world?
Yeah, absolutely. So context of it, I mean, you've probably heard the word succession almost like medieval times, like in terms of who's going to replace the king, right? Or whatever the case may be, whoever's in power. In this case, succession planning or succession management is the act of putting a strategic process in place to develop leaders for organizational capacity. A lot of times it involves identifying internal talent, both high performers, but also people that have high potential. It's not maybe someone who's your top earner, today. It might be your top earner next year, right? And so it's the act of identifying the folks in your organization that have the potential to replace, particularly positions of leadership or criticality, right? And so it's more than just talent pipelines. I think folks in HR are pretty familiar with building a talent pipeline. If you're an IT company, you're going to have IT talent readily available. This is more than that. It's the competency of leadership and in those critical positions.
Gotcha. And so for successors or succession planning, it's focused primarily on kind of the manager, leader, more impactful positions rather than kind of frontline or individuals who are not higher up in that hierarchical chain. Would that be fair to say?
It's kind of a both because,
Okay.
when the leader is gone and they're replaced by someone else, it's a chain reaction, right? Like opportunity presents itself in the organization all the way down, right? But it is focused on developing the leadership positions and the succession of those critical roles. The
Yeah.
criticality, I think, is the main piece there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I like your point that traditionally, when we think of successors, we think of king handing it over to their son, who's potentially a prince, without really identifying is that the best individual who should be the successor or the next in line to kind of take over these more linchpin type of positions. So, with that said, from a business perspective or organizational perspective, do you have any recommendations on how they can engage or what they should look for when looking for successors?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, in terms of the president, are we talking about the president or are we talking broadly?
We can. So I was going to kind of ease in there, but we can,
Okay. So yeah, I mean, hiring leaders, like I said earlier, is a different competency. The leadership in itself is a completely different thing than being technically capable in any particular area, right? Like again, going back to the IT example, you could know how to code, but you don't know how to communicate or delegate or prioritize or strategize, right? So those are all different aspects of leadership that are taken into consideration in succession planning. And if you maybe do have someone who is super technically capable, how can we develop the leadership capabilities in them, for them to potentially succeed? And look, not everybody might be identified, right? It's not everyone's going to be the CEO of a company, but the point is to identify the potential for those areas and build that out. And so, it's really a part of business continuity. I think there's like Pepsi or Coca-Cola, one of the two products, their CEO had turnover multiple times. And, it really was an issue that they had to keep coming back to that instead of making progress and continuing to have sales and being successful. They had to keep bothering with, how they were going to replace their CEO to set their strategic vision and be successful. So it was interesting example there.
Yeah. Yeah, and to your point, another recent example that I could think of, a pretty big fumble, was the transition at Disney. So they
Mm.
had Bob Chapek, who I think, if memory serves me right, he was responsible for the theme parks for Disney across the globe, and he was tagged as the next successor. But he kind of fumbled when handed over all of Disney. This was also during COVID, so it may not solely be to his poor leadership skills. It may have been the pandemic that may have influenced it. But he was only there for less than a year before they had to call Bob Iger essentially back into the reins to make sure to bring Disney back together. And so we see kind of the impacts of making a poor leadership decision reverberating throughout some of the movies and shows Disney has made. I don't know if you've seen any of the recent kind of Marvel or Disney Plus. They're not the
Yep.
best.
Yep. We are big Star Wars fans in my
Okay.
household, and some of those
Yeah.
miniseries are better than others. Like we loved Andor and didn't love a couple of the other ones. So, yep.
And Andor's one I've been trying to get into. I've heard that's one of the few ones that is actually pretty good. But I
Oh, we
watched,
love it.
okay.
Yeah, it's very good.
Okay. I tried getting into the Darth Vader one. That was okay. And there was another one with kind of I guess kind of like what's the word that I'm looking for? Like a bunch of women who were trying to use the Force, but they weren't
Oh
exactly
yeah.
Jedi. I don't remember what that.
Not Ahsoka. It's
Yeah, 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 yeah.
what it's called. I know what you're talking about though. We watched
Yeah.
it, and that honestly, that's a testament. I don't remember what it's called because it wasn't that good.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. And I was like, this is getting a little wonky. Okay.
Yep, for
So
sure.
definitely as we progress up the leadership hierarchy, we can see the importance of identifying and selecting the right leader. We've seen how it played out in the real world with Pepsi and Coke, along with Disney. Now we're going to transition over into kind of the most, I think, critical position that can exist, at least today, which is the President of the United States. So there are a ton of people who have wanted to become president. A few have become president, and maybe not everyone was always qualified, dare I say, to be the president. And so, if we want to engage or start developing a successful succession plan to ensure we have a robust pipeline of qualified individuals who can step into that role, what are your thoughts? What recommendations? And how do we solve world hunger while you're at it? No, I'm kidding. But how do we go about identifying those characteristics?
Yeah, it's a big question and it's
Yeah.
an interesting one too. I think what's interesting to me too is there's, the 25th Amendment talks about presidential
Okay.
succession while they're in, the seat, right? Like if there's a world event and God forbid the president dies, the vice president takes over and then the speaker and all these things, right? So we have some of this forethought. We don't have it necessarily, in my mind, is built up, at least as a citizen, as a voter, you know, ahead of the primaries and then ahead of the general election, right? A lot of times, at least to me, the last couple of years as voters, it's like we go to the poll and it's like, how did we get here? Like what's going? Like
Yeah.
this is the best we got. Like we're a
Yeah.
big country, we have a
Yeah.
lot of resources, and so that I think has frustrated a lot of people. And in my mind, a constructive way I've thought about it is like, as an IO psychologist, well, why don't we succession plan for this better, right? Um, so the concepts are there. How do we get better? I don't know necessarily. There's a lot of powers that be, right? There's a lot of financiers and the party systems that are certainly having whatever hands they have in, um, you know, getting behind whoever they like and will promote their initiatives, right? But we the people kind of have to also be thinking about, well, who's coming up, right?
Yeah.
And I think the primaries in a lot of ways are more important than the general elections, right? That's our best way to get involved and say, like, who do we want to succeed and how can we as individuals succession plan for that role? So that's, I guess, like my call is like, get more involved in your primary elections, right? Think a lot of people sit that one out, and I think that's not the one to sit out, right?
Yeah.
If,
Yeah.
if you're going to take a stand, maybe do it a different day. But yeah, that's my call to action in terms of primaries. In terms of actually picking folks, there's like I think 30 or 40 people on the Democratic side that have been mentioned in media as potentially running in
Yeah.
2028. Who knows how that'll shake out? But we've seen huge stages of huge panels of folks that have varying degrees of competency, skills,
Mhm.
abilities. The first thing we need to do from an IO psych
Yeah.
perspective is job analysis. to define, well, what do we actually need from the person in this role, right? Of course, it's not a one size fits all, but yeah, how do we define what is needed? And I think we get distracted with a lot of different things, you know, age and religion and all these types of things that, you know, wouldn't necessarily be on like a job description for you or I applying to a job comes into the conversation. Not that those aren't important, right? Maybe those fall under ability, the KSA ability section. But nonetheless, we need to get more pointed about defining what do we actually need from the person in this role to be successful as a country, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I have never heard, or I don't know where to find if an actual job description exists for the president. So has anyone actually taken the time to sit down to conduct a thorough job analysis to say, of the president, we expect them to do task one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight. And in order to complete those, they need to have KSAs A, B, C, D, et cetera, et cetera. If that exists, I don't know where to find it. Would you happen to know where that exists by any chance,
I'm
if at
not
all?
aware of anything, you
Okay.
know, there are qualifications, like you have to be a natural born US citizen, you have to be at least 35 years old, and you have to have lived in the US for a minimum of 14 years, right? And again, like I'm not a political like expert by any
Yeah.
means. I did a little bit of homework before we sat down. So there are qualifications, but I don't know that there's a job description beyond that. It's pretty open of hey, who wants to raise their hand and who has the money, you know, in the backing to do it. Um, is that the best way to operate,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And so for me, I definitely agree. Step one would be first conduct a job analysis, identify those task KSAs, but I would even potentially expand that out a little bit further. Here's what I mean by that. So we recognize that not only are behaviors, tasks, KSAs critical to success, but there may potentially be a personality, what's the word, constellation that also exists that would fit better for someone in this role. So, what are your thoughts on potentially including or adding or folding in a personality assessment to make sure someone has the right temperament? Depending on who you ask, different temperaments may be more or less appropriate, but let's start there. What are your thoughts on folding in potentially a personality assessment?
That's a super interesting point. And, you know, I think part of why I'm so drawn to it is because so many people are
Yeah.
so hung up with, well, how does the president speak and how do they look and how do
Hmm.
they act? Like, that's a great way to formalize, like, beyond just, oh, they look pretty, you know,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
look like they could do the job. Can they actually, is their personality truly suited? I love that idea. I think that's smart and a good way to kind of target what a lot of people conceptualize without a lot of strategy. So I love that.
Yep. And I'm going to throw in another potential, some may say controversial
Sure.
assessment or set of skills that I'll share it and then you'll share your thoughts in terms of is it appropriate, is it not appropriate? So, in governing an entire country, especially one as large and as diverse as the United States, I think it would be beneficial if someone's cognitive ability was at least at the median or, kind of average or above. So potentially also embedding a cognitive assessment. So that way we have a holistic picture of potential candidates in terms of their capability to engage in these behaviors, have these KSAs, have the right personality, and potentially have the right cognitive ability to be able to blend all of that together to create someone who I think potentially would be a great successor. So what are your
And are we
thoughts
talking
there?
basic cognitive
Yeah.
function? Or are we talking
Yeah.
IQ? You know, it's
So,
like,
yeah. Tell me
I
more.
mean,
Tell me your thoughts.
because you know, a lot of jobs, you hear horror stories of
Yeah.
people doing 4 and 5 interviews, and you know,
Yeah.
the multiple hurdle assessments that get increasingly harder. I think as long as we're doing it across the board and transparently, right? I don't know that that's super controversial. I don't know that you should maybe set a minimum, but you should say X candidate has an IQ of, you know, whatever, and X candidate has this comparative IQ. You still get
Yeah.
to vote. It's not going to disqualify them necessarily, but let's lay the
Yeah.
cards out on the table and see where we're at. And maybe like other instances, a lower IQ, but maybe a higher leadership competency or a higher personality match compensates for that. You know, who knows? But at least we're being transparent about laying the cards on the table and saying this is what it is, right?
Yeah. And I like that idea of adding kind of transparency so that way the voter has the whole picture of someone. Because I think we only get snapshots or tidbits or
Yep.
whatever, we're able to see of candidates. But if we have a holistic picture, maybe potentially their scores on each of the assessments, the voters are now the most informed to be able to make the decision they believe
Let's
is
make it
right
more
for them.
objective.
I like.
For sure, for sure. And that, transparency is a huge, I don't want to say obstacle navigating succession management transparently. You can be very transparent, and sometimes there's companies where, oh, there is a known successor, and other times it's happening behind closed doors in C-suites or boardrooms, or whatever the case may be. That's a choice, right? And so to run a private company that way, an organization can do that if they want. In this case, it's the president of the United States. This is, like you said, maybe the globally the most important
Yeah,
job ever.
yeah.
Yeah, I think there should be transparency.
Yeah, I agree. And so, kind of pivoting a little bit, if we were to potentially implement these assessments and individuals were to start taking them, I think we can really open up in terms of who we can consider for this role. Right now, it seems it's a very closed, I don't want to say closed, difficult to get in system where if you don't know the right people, you don't, buddy up or bump shoulders, bump elbows with the right business, you don't have the right backing money behind
Yeah.
you, it's really tough to get into this game. Whereas kind of opening it up, letting anybody take these assessments really broadens the pool of potential candidates we can consider. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that does limit us in a lot of ways. How many people do we have in this country? So many smart, intelligent, capable people. I'm not saying Joe Schmo, next door to me is definitely cut out to be president, but there at least should be some conversation, right? And again, succession management, like you're going to have an organization where maybe the CEO is about to retire, and the vice presidents or the board members, or you have a list of other leaders in lesser positions potentially being a candidate in there. But you can also look throughout your organization as well, right? You might have an up and comer, someone who's been there for 20 years but is like a middle manager. You can still consider that person. I don't think that their salary necessarily should be a limiting factor or a disqualifying factor to their consideration. And also
Yeah.
succession management happens over time, right? Like none of this
Hmm.
happens overnight. It's not like on Tuesday they pick the person, on a Wednesday we vote, right?
Yeah.
We do this in 4-year cycles, and you hear already like it's 2025 and they're already talking about 2028. So there is time to develop folks that aren't necessarily just next in line. And it's not about king making, it's about development, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. And so, from my perspective, if we are able to incorporate or include and invite a diverse set of individuals to be a part of this, I think we dramatically increase the pool. So an analogy I like to use, or an example I typically go back to, is professional sports. So the reason behind that is their billion, if not trillion-dollar industry, where they invest a lot of money to ensure they have the right people with the right skills, right successors in place to be sure to replace, kind of the fading stars. What I like is it. I'm a huge baseball fan, diehard Dodger fan. But what I like about baseball is they don't care where you came from. As long as you're able to, have the skills to be able to do well within our team, you can be, from the poorest city in some of the poorest nations in the world. But if you've got it, come join our team. And at the end of the
yep,
day, I kind of want to hope that we can encourage individual. Maybe they had, a rough start. They don't have kind of the best backing, but they have the potential to be able to perform in this
for
critical
sure.
role. Yeah, and invite them to, take part and see if they
Yep.
can go all the way.
And you see it more and more like in Congress folks and Senate seats and even just local government representatives. More people are, I mean, people have always been in those roles, right? But it does seem like you're getting more organic folks um, running for those positions and winning, maybe more than I've seen in my lifetime. And part of that was very much attributed to Trump's initial emergence, right? People like business acumen, and bringing that to the role in relation to our debt, in relation to running the government like a business as opposed
Hmm.
to a government, right? Like, so that's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
How about also like in terms of competency, you know, being commander in chief of the military, like maybe we consider more folks from military leadership background. That's a different personality, right, than like a
Yeah.
CEO of a business. So it'd be interesting to see how that shakes out. Um, you know, we also like it comes into question like the topic of integrity, you know, and that being potential competency. Like, how do you find the most you know, folks with the highest integrity? You know, I don't know, but there's different pieces of this that, yeah, we should consider folks from different backgrounds. It's not just a blueprint like the president should be this way, you know?
I like that. And as you were sharing that, some of the things that came to my mind was so I'm going to go a little bit off on a tangent here, but I'm definitely
Sure.
curious to get your thoughts.
I'll follow
So,
you there.
yeah, everything you just shared, should someone have a business background? Should someone have a military background? What does their integrity look like? What if we were to create kind of an assessment or situational judgment test, whatever it might look like, interview, performance exam, whatever it might look like? We have candidates who are interested in becoming the president take part in this. So let's say we build, I don't know, an assessment to evaluate military, I don't even know what the word is, military potential or military success. And we have them go through a simulation. Like, what would they do in this scenario? What would they do in
Yeah.
that scenario? And then we publish those results to include it within the overall score as we get individuals in the primaries and kind of progress closer and closer to election day. We can
Yeah.
have those scores follow them. So that way the entire populace can see when it comes to military or military strategy or whatever,
Yeah.
however we want to define it, this is how they scored. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that sounds really cool. You know, I
Okay.
mean, like it's one thing to get in front of an audience of you know, at a town hall or like even at a debate, you know, and you're asked, well, what's your stance on this? It's really easy to say,
Yeah.
oh, I like the color blue, and then, you know,
Yeah.
turn
Yeah.
around and, you know, you're picking red, then whatever. I shouldn't have picked colors that represent the parties, but whatever. I like yellow and
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever. um my point is it's easier to turn around and contradict yourself on a single statement, right? But when you're
Yeah.
given a situational exam, you're giving us, the voters, an opportunity to really see that through. I'm thinking of, I just watched the documentary, I think on Netflix, about capturing Osama bin Laden and how Obama was in the Situation Room. And part of that operation involved flying into enemy territory without permission and potentially causing a separate conflict, you know, taking the risk to get to get the target, right? And so um, it's something like that, as simple as that, of just like, how would you handle that? And you know, affiliation to risk, like how open to risk
Mhm.
are you? Like maybe we're feeling like we need to be, I don't want to use the word conservative because again that's associated with the party,
Yeah.
but maybe we need to be a little bit, play it safer, one election cycle, and maybe we're feeling a little bit more confident a different election
Yeah.
cycle, right? I think those things are important.
Yeah. I agree. And so bringing it back to the professional sports example, are you familiar with baseball by any chance? Is
More
that
of a
this?
football basketball person, but
Okay.
I you know, I
Yeah.
dabble. I know who the Dodgers are.
Okay. Let's go with football. So that might
Okay.
that might be a better example. So
Sure.
imagine you are the owner of a football team. And imagine we approached you trying to hire your next quarterback. Let's say,
Okay.
the one you have right now is injured and they're probably
Sure.
not going to come back. So would it make more sense to have a panel of 15 quarterbacks give 2 minutes, just like we do in the presidential debates, 2 minutes to answer your questions? And
Yeah.
then you have to make a determination which quarterback you want to hire. Or would it make more sense to actually see them in a real life scenario of, the defensive line is coming in on a blitz and they see a receiver over there in the corner,
Yep.
actually watching them do that? Now, of these two scenarios, which one do you think, or should we lean towards in terms of hiring a quarterback? What are your thoughts there?
Look, I like the idea of
Yeah.
keeping like the initial pool open and like having an open mind, but you got to narrow it, right? Like it is so distracting when you have 15 people on a stage and they're all fighting for the same, like you said, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous. How can anyone make a choice like that? So yeah, I think we have to do a better job of narrowing it to giving like truly our best candidates, from both parties at primaries, so then we can make the best decision possible. Golly, yeah. And I think about like the Cleveland Browns with that big
Yeah.
quarterback room right now.
Yeah.
I also think about like Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson, like what's going on in New York,
There you go.
and
Yeah.
short and long term. But anyways, interesting.
Yeah. So for me, it makes sense to actually watch people in action. I think that is where we can get the highest yield in terms of making the highest predictive validity on who we think would perform best in their role. And
Yeah.
if it works for virtually every other job that exists, I don't see why it can't work for them. Yeah. Why I can't
Yeah.
work for the president?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have another question. Okay. So from your perspective, it looks like in order to be the president, there are basically just three minimum qualifications. Natural born US citizen, at least 35 years old, and lived in the US for a minimum of 14 years. What are your thoughts on being more flexible with those?
I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, look, it's what is it? I think I have my notes. Article 2 of the Constitution, like you could put that to a vote potentially and ask the people what they think. Look, we are I guess a growing nation, a changing nation. The melting pot has melted 12 times over, right? And we are as we are today, right? I don't know. I don't know how folks would feel about that. And I don't know that it's necessarily
So
I don't
for
know how I
me,
feel.
the I could definitely see why a natural US born citizen, we wouldn't want, from my perspective, I wouldn't want the potential influence of foreign influence to have
Sure.
someone, they can be very charismatic. So a good example, like love him or hate him, is Arnold Schwarzenegger. So he
Right.
wasn't necessarily, naturally born in the US,
Yeah.
but he's very charismatic. And,
Yep.
let's say he was, I'm not saying he is, but a puppet for, some other large
Sure.
national.
Sure. Sure.
So he's very charismatic. He resonates with individuals. He was the governor of California. And
Yeah.
so who's to say, he couldn't theoretically make his way all the way up to the presidency just for us to later find out, well, actually, he's, a puppet for, this country. And so I could see why that would be a consideration. The 35-year-old one, that one I'm not as convinced. I think if we have individuals who potentially may be younger than that, and they have all the skills, the right personality, the right temperament, their cognitive abilities off the charts, I don't see why we can't or we shouldn't also consider those individuals. What are your thoughts there?
It's interesting too because where we're at currently, you're seeing and are probably about to see a huge transition in government of all these folks that have been in government the past 40 years retiring and or passing or whatever the case may be. And so I do think that's something to ask ourselves. I personally don't necessarily think age is a super powerful qualifier. I've worked with folks younger and older than me
Yeah,
that
yeah,
varied in skill and ability. Um, I do think that there's a level of like life experience, and I think you'd have a harder time convincing like certain generations like to lower it.
yeah,
So whether I think it is or how viable that is, I don't know. But that one to me is not. I don't think is as important. There's less conflict of interest there. I guess is what I'm
yeah.
thinking.
Yeah. And so
Like,
for me, what I find interesting is kind of the duality of the US. Here's what I mean by that.
sure,
So in the business world and in the tech world, we are all in kind of the young entrepreneur, the young tech
yeah,
genius. We're super into learning more about them, kind of following their footsteps. Zuckerberg immediately comes to mind. I'm trying to think of any other, the guy who started Snapchat, I forget his name, but that guy comes to mind.
yeah.
So on the one hand, we're really involved, really interested in, and glorify the young individual who's able to kind of crack these complex codes, but not when it comes to our political realm, or not when it comes to, potentially identifying the leader of
Yeah.
the free world. I I don't know why that exists or why there is that duality there. Do you have
I
any
wonder if
insights?
there's other age. I'm trying to think of other examples where age would be a qualifier of a job. And I don't know that I can. I mean, everything asks if you're 18 or older to see if
Correct.
you're a
Yeah.
legal
What?
adult. But then that like so what happens if they move the legal adult age to 21 rather than 18? Haven't they talked about doing that either at least at the state level in some
Yeah.
places? Like that's interesting too. I don't know. I don't know that that one's as important. I really don't. If you've
Yeah.
done your homework and you have what it takes, great. Some of it's time and place too, like, and that's part of succession planning, right? Like planning ahead and development. Um, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, no, I
Good
that
question.
that yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's I'm curious about that. Is we we're really caught in, the top. So when it comes to kind of Forbes, they do the top 30 under 30 or
Yeah,
something like that, or the top
yeah, yeah.
40 business people
Yep.
under 40, but we don't have that same kind of approach or that same kind of
Well, so let me turn it back
admiration.
to you. Like, is there anyone from the 30 under 30 that you read a bio about and you're like, whoa, this person would make a great, candidate. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
There was, but
okay,
he has become a little controversial as of
okay,
late.
okay.
So, of course, it's Elon Musk and
Yeah.
the whole kind of what were they called? The PayPal Rat Pack, I think they were called. There was like five or
Okay.
six of them that came together. I know Peter Thiel is another one. So when they were younger, they were at the top of their game. But as of late, as he's gotten a little bit older, he's gone a little off the rails. So I don't know. Maybe if we had him when he was younger, he would have done a better job. But now it's like we're not really
But so
sure.
what to what extent is that demonstrated experience? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you could make the case that someone under 35 hasn't demonstrated for long enough. Like if there's a sustained commitment, right? Like if you win 2 terms, you could be in the presidency for 8 years. Say you elect Elon at 30, and by 38, he's
yeah,
where we at today. I don't know how old he is currently. I know he's older than 38, I would
yeah,
assume. Um, maybe there's something to say about that. I don't know. But it's interesting. It's definitely interesting.
yeah. So you brought up an interesting point that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. So there is, what's the right word? Rumors potentially that Trump may try to go for a third term. How likely do you think that that will actually happen? Is that a reality? Is he, are we just blowing, crazy smoke? What are your thoughts there?
I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. I've definitely heard that. I don't know. I think that there's a lot to be said for, that the terms were put in place for a reason. You see other countries doing other models of having longer terms or no terms. And you could, argue there's a continuity of operation in that way too. Like, coming from the federal government, every 4 years we go through, transition books and preparing for a person to, the president to change or not. Obviously sometimes there's continuity and that's fine. It would be easier to not do that every 4 years. I don't know if the trade-off necessarily, I mean, that's a really specific scenario.
Yeah, yeah,
I think there is value in terms. I think there's also value in continuity. Obviously, a lot would have to happen to make that the legality of that valid. So that'd be interesting. It would also be interesting if, say, that did happen, that would present the opportunity for someone like an Obama to run again. That would be
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Two more questions for you, and these are
Yeah,
kind of the biggest ones, if you will. So if it's too abstract or, kind
okay.
of doesn't make sense, I totally get it, but I'm
Yeah,
interested in hearing your thoughts, and I think our
sure,
listeners will be too.
sure.
So the first one is, what do you think skills, personality wise, potential, well, cognitive ability, let's have that one be off the table. When it comes to personality and when it comes to KSAs, competencies that someone possesses, what do you think constitutes or would be the outline of a successful presidential candidate? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot lately. At CC Pathways, we are developing a leadership readiness workshop for folks. And so I've been thinking a lot about differentiators between leaders and people that maybe aren't leaders, or maybe folks that aren't ready yet to be leaders. So the topic of succession. Honestly, I think a huge piece of it that is overlooked is just judgment. Like, leaders are in places of position to exercise their good judgment on behalf of the organization, the population, whatever the case may be, right? Um, a lot of people, like I said, can be technically competent or even independently intelligent. Maybe they are good public speakers, maybe they're not, whatever the case may be. I think judgment is the single most important thing. Like, how do you make decisions in the face of adversity, when things are complicated, when there's obstacles, when there's two bad choices? That's huge to me. And I think should be for voters as well.
I like that. So you bring up for me a very interesting point, almost a sense of morality or a sense of ethics. I mean, that should be
That's
absolutely
part of it.
critical. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, yeah. I like that. Okay. And now this is kind of, I think everyone's interested in hearing this next one. So if it's again too much, feel free to let me know. But if not,
Sure.
I'm curious as well.
Okay.
Do you see any candidates right now who kind of fit the bill on in terms of who we should be looking at to be the next potential president?
I could see it going a lot of different ways. I think of those, 70 people potentially that have been cited in the media. Um, there have to be and are a handful of really strong and good candidates, whether they're ready today or whether they will be in 2028. I mean, I hate to like give a non-answer, but that's succession management. Let's get them
Yeah.
ready. Let's do what we got to do in the next 3 years to have a really good crop of folks to pick from, so that we can feel confident and sure about it. Like I hate these like 49.9%, these 50-50 votes. It's like, can we just not find someone who's good and everyone can get behind them and we can agree on something and then make progress as a nation instead of just constantly. I hate that. It's so unproductive to me. And as an IO psychologist, I constantly seek to be like more effective, more efficient. It's like, that is just not how I like to do things. So yeah, I would love to see one great candidate emerge and just blow everyone out the water and just have a great, strong, you know, campaign and campaign and term.
Got it. I dig it. Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, I think we had a great conversation today. I definitely think the presidential position should invest in having a robust succession plan. So with that, if people wanted to learn more or connect with you, where would you recommend they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active. I'll get back to you right away if you reach out to me there. There's some information about me, obviously on my profile, but also on the CC Pathways website as well. Feel free to join for a workshop, or contract us out for that type of work. Yeah, looking forward to connecting with you folks. Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to also link your info in the description for this
Awesome.
video. So it was a
Very good.
pleasure, and I'll catch you all in the next one.